Yeah, man. Do as thou wilt. Peak TDs. Ladies and gentlemen and variations thereof, welcome to the Selectives Lorecast, a casual Elder Scrolls podcast. Today we're talking about orcs, Orsimer, and their culture, because they've got one. When we're trying really, really hard not to think about them as sentient fungus. But as usual, eventually this will eventually dissolve into a Warhammer 40k cast, as it always does. My name is Rotten Deadite. With me today are...
Hi, I'm Merlin. I used to be the resident r/Teslor Orsimer fetishist, and I'm coming out of retirement for this episode.
I am Andrew, also known as the White Guar.
Okay, and I am James, also known as Aramithius.
So, Orsimer.
Orsimer.
All right, Orsimer.
I assume you guys are just gonna sit back and let me ramble for a while.
We kind of are. Let's talk.
Orsimer?
We like to do things in chronological order here, or at least I do. In some semblance of order. So let's
play the same series, right? Time.
Yeah. So let's talk about let's talk about how the Orsimer happened, because it's important to remember, as with all things in the Elder Scrolls universe, you're either a man or a mare. So the Orsimer started as altmer.
Yes, with a D.
Yes, thank you. Just like all elves, one
maybe.
theorizes. Yeah, depending on who you ask. If you ask the altmer, then and so they were, according to one legend, notably according to ESO, not the Orsimer side of the story, they were transformed into what we now call Orsimer or Orcs, the pariah elves, by an event which is pretty much the only thing I know about Orcs, which is that Boethia,
Yes.
probably according to Boethia, picked a fight with Trinimac, the hero, one of the heroes of the altmer, and devoured him and spoke with his voice what Boethia considered to be the truth,
Right.
that Trinimac had been hiding from the altmer, and then crapped him out, and what was left was Malacath,
Yes.
a great big pile of poop. Now, okay, so as with everything in the Elder Scrolls universe, the first thing we ask when we read a myth or a story or anything of the sort is, where did it come from and what purpose does it serve? So why in God's name would anybody make up a story like that?
Well, the reason that Boethia and Trinimac were in this fight in the first place is because Boethia was leading the Velothi away from Aldmeris, and Trinimac's role as the Mithraic figure from the Altmer was he was Auriel's right-hand man, basically. He was dedicated to trying to keep Aldmeris together.
A cultural hero is, I think,
Yeah.
what he's technically classified as. Which, by the way, still doesn't make him less of an Aldmer or, using the Merethic era school of thought, less of a god.
Right.
Yeah, I would kind of argue. Well, I would slightly argue whether we're talking Aldmer at this stage, because it wasn't
Good point.
Aldmeris, it was Somerset, because
right.
we're talking Middle Merethic. But anyway,
Fair. What always threw me about this is the Velothi weren't the first to partake in the Sundering. That was the Dwameri, if I remember correctly. But Trinimac didn't really have the ability to stop them, whereas with the Velothi, he felt that he either had to recover from not having stopped the Dwemer, or because they were being led away by the Daedra rather than by themselves, he was obligated to do so. So Trinimac and the Aldmeris army, or Somerset army, chased them down, and then Boethia got into a basically champion fight with him as a metaphor for having
Cultural
their
powers, basically.
cultural differences and personified. And then
I think that's all entirely accurate. I don't think it's ever spelled out that way.
no,
But it sounds,
that would be boring.
but yeah, if you sort of read between the lines with all the various, and you combine all the various cultural stories together, not only just the Orsimer, but also the Altmer version of the Orsimer creation myth, I have to say that sounds like the safest possible way to explain it. I think that's 100% accurate. Yeah.
Although there is a version that for some reason the Daggerfall Covenant disallow and claim is absolute heresy. Which I can't remember precisely which one, but there's another version which is kind of interesting. There's the idea of that instead of Trinimac being devoured by Boethia, we have a version called Morlock Orcfather, which is saying that that Morlock did it to himself afterwards. He was beaten by Boethia and Malacath, or not and Malacath, and Mephala togetore, and couldn't stand the shame of it, and so
he outcast himself.
The phrase is he tore the shame from his spirit, and that's which incidentally involved slicing open his own chest. So make of that what you will.
Oh, that sounds familiar.
Yeah.
I cannot believe I didn't read this, and yet I wound up writing something very similar as like my last published piece.
Well, I believe that piece that James is referencing is actually from ESO.
It is.
Yeah. So do not at any given point. I'm not saying that ESO's writers rip off fan headcanon.
I wrote mine last year, long after this was released.
Oh, okay. Well, but my statement still holds true. They do read Reddit, and it's impossible, and the official forums, and it is physically impossible to separate yourself from something you've read.
Oh, for sure.
So so if anybody has written something in the past that then suddenly shows up in some very vague reference or transformed nature in ESO, don't think of it as ESO is stealing. Think of it as an idea so good that it's propagated.
Yeah. That works.
Like Ekmer.
Yeah.
Well, we still
here to trumpet about it. But yeah, there's also there's also the changed ones, which has the change from altmer to the Orcs happening when the followers of Trinimac smear themselves in Boethiah's leavings. Yeah, which is again the kind of doing it to themselves sort of angle.
Yeah.
So yeah, and then we have Topol, which is we're saying that the Orcs and other beast folk were already in Tamriel. So yeah.
I think it. I think it's worth pointing out to anyone who read the Greg Keyes novels.
Oh yeah.
Which were not great.
Well, they weren't great. That's an accurate statement. I'll agree with that. They weren't great.
Yeah.
They were good.
However, there is a part where we get to see Malacath in Ashpit, and he says how the whole Boethia pooping out Malacath, that's way too literal because mortals have a hard time with abstract concepts.
Oh.
And so he says that's all very metaphorical and that's not really what happened.
Well, none of this really happened.
I disagree. I think this is the way I prefer my Elder Scrolls lore is it's a metaphor and therefore it actually happened. You know,
I agree.
I like the idea that he wasn't. That it's ridiculous that Trinimac was eaten by Boethia. How in God's name did she do it?
With a fork.
Well, no. I mean, that's a completely ridiculous idea. And so I like the idea of thinking about it as both, basically, of saying, of course, Boethia didn't need him, but also she totally did. You know, I like supporting both of those things. Yeah, War of Manifest Metaphors, exactly, Sims, exactly. Thank you. Yeah.
Well, and then on top of that, we've also got Mephala playing a role in this whole thing too, because Mephala showed up, stabbed Trinimac in the back,
right?
Which I think is interesting. Considering the dichotomy that we see between Malacath and some of the other Daedra. So Malacath from the Dunmer point of view is one of the corners of the House of Troubles, whereas I imagine if we were to ask an orc and say, hey, what do you think of Mephala and Boethia, they'd be like mad about it because that's why they are the way they are. That's why they are the pariah folk. And so, I mean, I think that's kind of interesting thing to look at. Yeah. You've got this mutual, head butting that's going on between these two sides. But yeah, I just wanted to point that out.
Well, that's almost happening within orc culture itself. You've got the Malacath worshippers who are glorifying in what they are, and this is us. We are now the sworn oath and the bloody curse, and so on and so forth. And then you've got the Trinimac lot, who are saying that Malacath. They're saying that Malacath is a lie, or Morlock is a lie, depending on precisely who's writing, and so we should go back and start worshipping Trinimac, which ESO is kind of painting as a consistent undertone throughout all of Orcish history, and the way that they phrased it is tying Orsinium, the idea of a central Orcish kingdom, to the Trinimac worshippers quite explicitly, whereas the stronghold culture is Malacath.
Right.
There's an interesting dichotomy there, that they're trying to be different things, which is fracturing the whole people.
If I can take this in a really weird direction, I've always read it as the Trinimac people are wear red hats that say "Make Orbis Great Again." They are perpetually calling back to a mythic time of when everything was better and purer, and there was never any chance in a Lorcanic creation that when Boethia and Trinimac fought, that Boethia wouldn't win, just because of how those forces are aligned. But like the Trinimac cult has some really good ideas of how to be more civilized and socially acceptable from the point of view of the rest of Tamrielic society, but doing so requires changing a lot of what actually makes them orcs. So there's always been a lot of really weird tension between the people who take Malacath way too seriously and wind up making the strongholds in Skyrim, which are definitely socially regressive environments, but they're more true to what the original concept of the orcs is. And then the Trinimac people, which goes against their nature, but also is not really able to ever completely succeed just because of their mythic place in the Orbis, which is one reason Orsinium keeps getting burned down.
Yeah. Because they exist to get shit on?
Basically.
Yeah.
There's one of the themes that's a little bit difficult to deal with in the philosophy that sort of is underpinning in the Elder Scrolls universe, in the quote unquote arena, is that there's always got to be a loser.
Right.
And that kind of seems like the allotment to the orcs. They're always going to be the bad guys. Are going to be the people that everybody blames shit on, and they're going to be the people who get run the fuck out of town, and that's just something they have to be comfortable with. And one of the things that I like a lot about Malacath's sort of personal philosophy that you see in Skyrim and then a little bit of in ESO is the idea that he's basically trying to teach his people life is brief and really fucking hard, and you can either get hard or get run over, basically.
Yeah.
Lie down or get down is basically the message. And it's sort of it's a very kind of I would describe it as a very angry and bitter emotion behind it, but the purpose of it is respectful, which is Malacath's just trying to help these people survive, and he understands that mythically they're boned. So as cruel and unusual as it is, he's just saying it's gonna be bad. So you guys have really got to be up on your, have really got to be confident. You've got to be good at what you do. It's sort of like an echo, kind of Vivek's Golden Path, which we've discussed in the past. But the purpose and result are much more clearly perceived by Malacath, whereas Vivek wasn't entirely sure what was going to happen. And as a result, Vivek wasn't entirely sure how to prepare her people for what was going to happen. But it was a very similar theme, which is shit's going to get bad and you guys have got to get ready.
Yeah. One of the things I think is interesting about the transformation and what happened to the orcs afterwards is how Trinimac went from being a strongly Anuic figure to an interesting, not echo, but kind of inversion of Padomaic ideals and more closely aligned with where Talos would wind up as far as we live in a kind of shitty world, and you have to do the best you can, and here's how we're going to do it.
Mhm.
And whereas Talos had the power available to make an empire of man, Malacath didn't. So they're more the underclass and doing the best they can with that, but they're still not getting ground down and keeping going after every time they burn Orsinium. And that's an interesting alternate parallel with how the Manic Empire is kept growing.
Yeah.
Yes.
And keeps conquering shit. And it's not that Malacath is trying to teach orcs to be total badasses so they never get run over.
Right.
He's trying to teach them
they're going to get run over.
So this is how you cope. Yeah.
Top tires.
Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah. Although it doesn't really feel like I don't know. I like the parallel with Vivek's Golden Path and the general Dunmurray philosophy. It's very, very similar, but there's the kind of the idea of the redemptive suffering and the progression, and then you will go through a trial and you will emerge in Dunmer culture. Whereas there's no real moving beyond in orc culture. There's no driving goal. It is just bare survival.
Right.
And there is a kind of a thought that you were saying about the kind of Anuic Padmaic side and driving change and that sort of thing. You've got a similar kind of low level change going on all the time in stronghold culture, because you've got the strongest male in charge until he's not, and until he's beaten, and then you've got everyone needing to realign to the new chief and everything else. You've got that constant low level stuff, which is why nothing ever gets off the ground in a way. But that change does happen. It's just different types of change, if you like.
Yeah. Right. It's
which results in cultural stasis almost, because you're so busy squabbling amongst yourselves, nothing ever actually changes overall.
Yeah, it's like Brownian motion. They're always moving, but they're never actually going anywhere.
Yeah. And an intrinsically Padmaic concept. Yeah.
Yeah. So what moved the Empire then? I kind of mentioned this briefly before we went on the cast, but the Empire started to accept them for during was it the Third Era? Was it? I can't remember.
I want to say. Go ahead. Sorry.
Yeah, and that was kind of antithetical to the way that Tiber certainly viewed the Orcs. It's kind of their things to be stomped on and ground into the corners of Tamriel. He really didn't like the Orcs, and that shows quite a bit in the way that the Pocket Guide is written, and anything of Tiber's era that talks about the Orcs is that they're scum.
Well, that's what made the filthy Breton, but
yeah, he has to find someone else to hate to ease his inferiority complex.
Everybody's like, Bretons suck, and he's like, yeah, but Orcs suck more, and everybody's like, yeah, and he's like, great, they're not talking about me anymore.
Yeah.
So
it's kind of what made that shift within the Empire. That's what I'm kind of curious about.
Well, I think knowing what we know about the way the Empire has been historically run, it's probably a safe bet to say, and I am talking off the top of my head here, and partially out of my ass, probably they just found the Orcs useful in some way. It could have been as simple as, hey, here's a new race of people that have a lot of money that they've been saving up, and we could sell them things.
And they hate the people you hate.
Yeah, exactly. And they hate the people that we hate. Yeah.
ESO has been kind of backfilling this, which I'm not sure how I feel about that. But now that we have to accept that Tamriel goes through cycles of, hey, the Orcs are cool, actually, let's temporarily use them, and then we can go back to killing them later. The Empire now has precedent for, what if we granted these people citizenship and see what happens? And then the Fourth Era has just been bad enough that they haven't gotten around to revoking it yet.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. At the ass end of the Third Era, it was very much sort of a, hey, let's give them their own town.
Yeah.
They're like people now.
Yeah, because they've carried on with that in spite of everything. I remember seeing a text somewhere that was talking about how the Empire actually physically moved Orsinium at some point in the third
loading screen in Skyrim.
Sorry? Oh, okay.
It's a loading screen in Skyrim. That's pretty much it.
Oh, okay. We've not got any more information. Okay.
Not that I know of. But yeah, so after the events of Oblivion in early 4E, I don't remember the exact year, the Bretons and Redguards got together for a greatest hits tour and burned down Orsinium again. So the Empire moved Orsinium to the mountains between Hammerfell and Skyrim, which is basically on the other side of Markarth. Is about where 2.0 is.
So Ferric kind of asks an interesting question, which is what went on in the conflict between Trinimac and Boethia that resulted in the elves choosing or being cursed to become Orsimer rather than becoming converts to the Velothi tradition. There's a sort of like, I don't think we've ever actually had a direct answer to this, but there's a bit of a, chicken and egg thing happening with Saint Veloth as to whether or not he was preaching the tenements of Boethia. Or was he preaching against the Aedra, and then Boethia got in touch with him and said, hey, we kind of agree on things. Here's some teachings that you might be interested in. And that's important because it means that because it affects how it determines how the teachings of Veloth or the preachings of Veloth would have been introduced in Altmer society. Was he either a nut job who worshipped, Daedra, or just didn't particularly like Aedra, or thought was something going on? Or was he being spoon-fed stuff by Boethia as a sort of a big, plot? And the reason why it matters is because that affects how he would have spoken to other Altmer. Other Altmer would have perceived him as either a nut job or a scholar or somebody who's who's acting in everybody's best interests or whatever. You could go on.
Subversive, nut job, and scholar are not mutually exclusive categories.
I was kind of thinking that in the back of my head too. Yeah, it could have been a combination of the three. And so when Boethia had her conflict with Trinimac, it would have been either Boethia defending Veloth or Boethia presenting things for Veloth to consume. You see? Right. And so the conversation that would have happened among Altmer at that point would have been either between future converts to Velothi culture or current converts to Velothi culture. Mm-hmm. So at that point, then you can kind of divide things in half between, so when you're trying to decide, what's this? When for each iniquity that Lorcan made clear to the world, Veloth read these signs and he told Boethia, who confirmed them, and he told Mephala, who made wards against them, and he told Azura, who sent Almsivi to steer the true folk clear of harm. See, that sounds like temple doctrine to me. That's that's grain of salt stuff. What I'm concerned with is really whether or not there were Altmer who were firmly so I think what we can assume is that there were basically three divisions of Altmer at this point. There were the diehard devotees of Trinimac who became Orsimer, the diehard followers of Veloth / Boethia who became the Dunmer, or the Chimer, I should say, and a third group, a very large group, who remained Altmer to this day, who didn't give a shit or really weren't falling on one side or the other more than anything else, or weren't in the vicinity at the time or anything like that.
Or followed Auriel.
Or were more identified as Auriel followers or something like that. Yeah.
I think a lot of the initial sundering was mainly, I think, between the Velothi, who actively believed in the Boethian teachings that Orbis was a prison and that it was an opportunity for them rather than just a place for them to wait to die. Then the majority of the Altmer society either wasn't invested enough or remained faithful enough to Auriel that they stayed put. And then the Trinimac group was dedicated enough to the specific ideals of Trinimac about keeping Altmer as unified that they felt the need to go and actively chase them. But when Boethia's teachings won, when you win an argument, when you win a religious argument, you don't convert the people who lost. They wind up either rejecting you more or rejecting their old path, which you've shown them to be false, and then finding a third way. Mm-hmm. And this was very much a religious thing rather than a more intellectual thing where you can say, here's the reasons I'm right. You have to come to accept that this is true. So that's the reason they went off to be Orcs instead of Velothi because they still hated the Velothi. They just lost to them, and that made a new path.
Yeah, it's something that a lot of people have been pointing out in, or they probably always been pointing this out, but it's something I've been reading a lot about, which is the idea that arguing with someone over an emotional point, like politics or religion frequently are, sometimes, as a matter of fact, more often than not, even if you bring up all the best points in the world and present irrefutable arguments, they just become even more convinced that they're right. And it's because of the way emotions and work, and also because of the way psychologically people rely or depend on a worldview that makes sense to them. And the sort of the psychological repercussion that or shockwave that happens when that's shaken is to double down and just put your hands over your ears and go, no, that can't possibly be true, and become even more convinced that you're right, because otherwise you're going to be emotionally speaking walking around all the time like, I don't know what's going on, everything could be true, everything could be false, I don't know, everything's crazy, I'm going nuts over here, this is Meshuggah on us.
Yeah, Boethia didn't prove herself right. She proved Oriel wrong, and those are different things.
A very major, one of the first things you learn in debate class is you don't have to be right, the other guy just has to be wrong.
Yeah.
Yeah. Is that then some attempt, just thinking about that angle of kind of owning the wrongness, is that more or less what's gone on with the Orcs becoming the Orcs and clinging to some curses and
possibly
to do with winning and losing, and kind of trying to own that we are losers now kind of idea.
Woo, second place.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. It's the kind of, well, this is now us. This is what we can do. Let's do it. Let's be the best losers we can. Sort of deal.
Possibly making the best out of the least. Carving L's into their foreheads. Woo! All right, yeah, we suck. Ow! It's a little bit difficult to say. To the tune of Smash Mouth. It's I get that reference. So it's a little bit hard to say how Orsimer culture retains its longevity, because one of the things about cultures that.
It doesn't. It's defined in terms of negation of the environment around it. There isn't a strong Orsimer culture in itself, and every time we try to build one, it gets burned down by the fucking Bretons.
And they have to start over again.
Yeah. Although the Iron Orcs are an interesting case there. There's a story in ESO about how the Iron Orcs come to be. That they were stone worshippers for a while, and they weren't really gaining any ground against the Bretons, who were just beating them hollow.
I see what you did there. Gaining any ground, that's good. Yeah, that's a good one.
Because the Bretons were using metal and stuff, and so, but in order to not use bone and leather and all this other stuff that really isn't good weaponry, the Orcs would have to do violence to the stones. They'd have to do things that they themselves hate. There's that idea of they eventually double down and think, okay, so we've got to mine this stuff. But they do so. They double down on the self-loathing side. They have to become what they hate, still revere the stones, but do stuff which does violence to the stones in order to survive.
Well,
I'm not entirely sure where I was going with that, but
it's just thematically, it sort of plays into one of the principles of Orsimer culture, which is, do the things that are really hard to do that you can't stand doing, and then that makes you tough.
The M in Malacath stands for masochism.
Right.
Yeah,
a little bit. A little bit. Yeah.
I'm still not sure that it's the kind of do stuff that's tough because it makes you better. That feels like a Dunmer thing. But it's do stuff. It's do stuff that's hard to do because you have to. Is the Orc perspective? Just deal with it.
Well, yeah, to a degree, but the Dunmer culture, the cultural version in the Dunmer, takes that a little bit further and says, do the stuff you hate because you have to. Do the job that's in front of you. but rejoice because it makes you better. You know, whereas the Orsimer are not trying to really worry that hard about people's feelings. It's that their culture is a little bit more focused, a little bit more immediate, because as Marilyn's pointing out, that their shit don't last very long. They never really get to the established point of saying, why are we doing all this? They never really get that far. Like, what's our reward? They never get to that point.
Tomorrow instead of today.
Well,
Yeah,
and they almost seem to reinforce that in culturally, where as it's pretty common knowledge that orcs don't live long past like 35, 40 or so, because they actively seek out their death. If they haven't died in battle at a certain point, then fuck it, I'm gonna go pick a fight with somebody until it kills me.
Like that's work is useless.
And so with the life is hard message, they're actively making life hard.
There's an orc in Oblivion or Morrowind.
There's one. Well, there's
Skyrim
Umbra.
has one.
There's Umbra in Morrowind.
Right.
Who's an orc, but I mean, you could argue that that's like the sword doing some weird shit.
Okay.
And then in Skyrim, you can run into an orc. At least I have outside of Windhelm. I don't know if that's like a scripted thing
throughout the game.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, I wasn't sure if it was like a roadside bandit kind of randomly generated sort of thing. Yeah, and they'll be like, yeah, you got to kill me now, and you're like, okay. But I think that's interesting that even in their general outlook that life is hard, even when life has the ability to not be hard for a minute. Like, not time to die now.
Yeah. They're just setting you up, man.
I think that might be a bit of a conflict between the more firmly conservative stronghold culture rather than the urban culture. Like the orcs, there aren't a lot of them in Skyrim, which really doesn't help. But there are 2 orcs in Markarth and a couple that I've run into in ESO that don't seem to show that nearly as much yet, and that might just be because they're young. But there's a marked difference between stronghold orc culture and the urban orcs that we see in Markarth, like the 2 smiths, or I can't remember her name, but there's an orc woman in Karthwasten who separated from her family and doesn't have her matronymic anymore. And there's very little to go on here, but if you're as dedicated to reading between the lines and making shit up as I am, you can find a lot of things about how orc culture might be changing as they come into more or less contact with the Empire.
Yeah. I remember seeing something similar in Morrowind in the Elder Scrolls 3. There's again that difference between the ones that go with the Empire and the ones that stay home. That you've kind of got this trickle of orcs that will leave the strongholds. Well, not necessarily the strongholds, but will leave an orc-dominated area and go and live in a city and be very, very different. Which
I don't remember how strongly this is true, but I have not played Skyrim in a long time, so I could be making things up. But I feel like I recall there are orc legionnaires, and there are a couple of characters in the Strongholds who were former legionnaires. And something I noticed after talking to them for a while and really marinating in their dialogue is those orcs all have better diction. They use longer sentences with more complete English grammar than the native Stronghold orcs. Which is an interesting cultural contamination. That's all the further I have.
Yeah, it's also kind of interesting that they view the Strongholds as a retirement home in that case.
Oh.
Which is, if they're going to do their duty and then go back, but then again, it could just be the whole kind of get your plot of land and go home sort of thing.
Possible,
kind of,
yeah. Stronghold culture, even without the Empire, makes a big deal of when you're young, going out and making a name for yourself. We have Gorbach Steelheart, I think, talks about it, which is why she used to become one of your companions. and a couple other characters I can't remember off the top of my head, but they all have the idea of when you stop being a teenager, you leave, and then you come back when you're older and ready to raise a family or to keep teaching. But that way you can channel all your idiot destructive energy into other people and not your own community.
Yeah. At least that's the way that the males seem to do it. It's kind of interesting that you brought up the female orc there from Skyrim, but there's a character in ESO who again wants to kind of wants to go away and see the world, but her parents want her to get married, and go and cement a political allegiance with another stronghold, and that sort of thing. So again, we've got the kind of this to a degree the sexual dichotomy there in the way that really isn't present in most of the other cultures in Tamriel, and the whole idea of the stronghold harem as well, as another angle there. I'm going to let you speak now because otherwise you're going to explode.
No, it's just the presentation. Part of it is we're not working with nearly enough representational data for this. We have 4 strongholds. You can count all the named orcs in Skyrim on your hands. And I haven't played ESO at all, so I'm not sure what's going on there. But there's a lot of... I feel like we're blurring the lines between how the ruling class of the strongholds works versus how general stronghold culture works. And that's hard to distinguish because there just aren't orc characters.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Like Borgach Steelheart, I messed up the only 2 continents in her name. Good one. Is not in the ruling family, and she's not enlisted to be a political marriage, so she's able to be a warrior and do pretty much whatever she wants.
Yeah, well, that's fair enough.
Although she does say the line, "Soon I will be of age, the taste is bitter," and I assume she's talking about old enough to settle down and die, not old enough to get hitched, but who knows?
Yeah.
So there's definitely a difference between Hrothgar culture and Skyrim culture as well. Because like in Hrothgar, it's almost like it's so the quest line, the main quest line, we're rebuilding the city and whatnot. It's almost like the Treaty of Peace with the Iroquois, like that story where you go around to the clans and they're all warring and killing, and you're like, no, we should all be friends and all love each other. And I don't know, and it's I kind of noticed a couple other similarities to Native American culture where like the women are like the wise women, and they also are the ones responsible for saying this is the guy that's going to be in charge.
Well, that to an extent that kind of mirrors Ashlander culture, because a lot of the political power in Ashlander culture is with the wise woman.
Or the Ashcans,
yeah. The military stuff is the Ashcans and the Gulakans, but
that's what I meant.
But there's that they kind of seem to hang around and go kill stuff, but the ones that actually do the thinking and the maneuvering are the wise women, which seems to, and the way that stronghold culture is presented in Skyrim, that's very, very structured as well. You've got the forge wife who does this. You've got another wife that
you have Hunt's wife, and then the wise wife. I don't remember her exact name, but she does alchemy.
Yeah. Well, there's also a forge wife. That's another role that they can take. I imagine there's probably like a stable wife or something who tends to the animals or whatever. Like, I don't know. I'm sure there's all kinds of shit that we don't see that can be extended from that.
There was originally supposed to be something like that in Skyrim as well, where the Nords had, a war wife and a hearth wife, and and so on. That didn't end up making it into the game, but
I think it's better with orcs.
Yeah,
I like it a little bit more with orcs too.
Skyrim Nordic culture is a really interesting take on how older cultures get diluted through cosmopolitan experience, and how we see. I can tangent into why the Nords in Skyrim are the way they are for hours, but there's the dilution of their original ideals into a generic, watered-down Talos and Imperial cult and basic just flavor over Cyrodiilic culture for spices. Definitely interesting, and I like the juxtaposition between that and these Skyrim strongholds that are more distinctively classical Orcish and just having to accept the fact that the Empire exists.
Right.
Yeah, there's part of me that's kind of itching to see a kind of second generation immigrant orc now. See how they see if you could actually have an orc family that would happen within the empire, because you only get the ones and twos.
Right.
But if you've actually got groups that started to migrate,
well, that would require us having a stable story for a long time, and that can't happen.
Yeah, yeah. No, that's. And I kind of want to go back to something that Ferric said a while back. It's the orcs are people who have their own who've had their cultural narrative destroyed. The kind of idea, and which is kind of why you can't get that get anything stable. So you don't really know where you're going.
Yeah,
But
and so it's impossible to plan. And
yeah.
There's a long-running bad joke that orcs are basically the African-American populace of Tamriel, and I think that really ties into it very well. And I'd like to try and explore this without stepping on any landmines, but there are parallels to be made in how the dominant culture saw them as inhuman or subhuman. They eventually wound up having to grant them citizenry and accept that they were more or less peers. And now, even today, with 200 years of acceptance by the Cyrodiilic Empire, there isn't a strong Orcish identity except as being, we're not Cyrodiils and we're not the people who the Cyrodiils hate either. And so they haven't been able to integrate with Tamrielic society. In the Cyrodiilic army, they're always depicted as being either specialized roles or different troops who are there as well, but just because they wear the same uniform doesn't mean they're the same unit.
Yeah.
And then they don't have a strong culture there, and the fact that they are never able to actually build one prevents them from being Cyrodiilic subjects entirely, or Cyrodiilic citizens. They're just Cyrodiilic subjects.
Well, this is actually a problem that a lot of American immigrants have.
Yeah.
Where, especially second-generation American immigrants, where they identify as, say, Asian, speaking about my ex-wife here, but they're not American enough to be American, or I guess you could say white enough to be American.
Yes, I was going to say,
not Asian.
They're not. Myself, I do not have this problem.
Yeah, but they're not Asian enough to be accepted back in their own country, or back in their parents' country. So, she used to tell me that she didn't feel like she was Vietnamese or American. She just didn't feel like either. And and it was the only people she could really identify with were people of exactly the same generation and background as her. In other words, the child of a Vietnamese immigrant,
Yeah.
And that's a really tiny number of people,
Yeah.
There's a whole body of literature on the subject, especially in the form of like graphic novels. There's a graphic novel I read not long ago by G.B. Tran called Viet in America. If you haven't read it, like pick it up and take a look. It's really great. But orcs.
Yeah.
So I have a question specifically for you, Merlin. A couple questions, I guess. It's kind of a multi-tiered thing. We kind of compared the orc strongholds to the ashlanders a little bit. But do you think that the ashlanders and the stronghold orcs, there's perhaps a difference in almost structure? Because if what we see of the ashlanders in Morrowind, we've got the four main tribes, right? The Urshilaku, the Arabanibson, the Zainab, and the was it that the what?
The Eintab or something.
Something, yeah. I don't know. I don't remember what the last one.
Cracking is the sound of me frantically looking at the ESPA page
so,
on Ashlanders.
Whereas while we look at orc strongholds, I mean, from what we see in Skyrim and ESO, there's little settlements kind of sprinkled around. Do you think that's just a difference in how they're displayed? Is that just a game design choice that they're actually more ashlanders than what we see in Morrowind, or is it that these strongholds are more like like little self-contained farming communities of like one or two families, and there's a lot more of them? Does that make sense?
Yeah. In this thread, we're going to briefly pretend that I have actually played Morrowind. I think Yeah,
Doors that way, motherfucker. Get out.
I think they start out as being both the Stronghold and the Ashlanders are defined as fractures against a more dominant body of the group, but the Ashlanders, at least as far as I know, aren't actively persecuted by the Dunmer. They're just very insular and go into the wasteland to live by themselves.
Outside of the dissidents and the Neverrain cult, for the most part, they're pretty largely left alone, except for kind of a imperial sort of interests. The Dunmer want, the House Dunmer want resources, or they want trade, and they'll do the Cortez or Columbus kind of thing and just kind of waltz in and expect people to kiss their ass.
But they're outcasts in their own society, whereas the Strongholds aren't people living out in the hinterlands of Orsinium. They're surrounded by people who don't like them at all and would happily enact racial violence against them that the Ashlanders don't see quite as much. So I think that adds a different flavor to it. But there's not really a religious aspect to it like the Ashlanders have, since although there'd be more of a Trinimac cult in Orsinium, they're still everyone's pretty much on board with following the dominant idea at the time of what Malacath looks like.
Sure, and that's really to lead into the main question that I wanted to ask, and this is something that I've kind of juggled with for a while, is the notion that as strongholds separate themselves from Orsinium, that they look at things like the Code of Malacath and they start to interpret things a little differently.
Yeah, I think that's strongly a reaction to their environment.
Yeah.
To briefly answer your question about various population numbers and distribution, I think the Ashlanders strike me a lot more as the Israelites after leaving Egypt. So they're more strongly identified and organized into tribes that are aligned with each other, and they're in a wilderness nobody else will inhabit. Whereas the Orcs are, at least the Stronghold Orcs that I've seen so far, strike me as more like the American pioneers of the early, specifically the Mormon pioneers who faced enough persecution from the other Americans to go find their own place and set up their own nation. Didn't get along well with the natives around them either.
Well, that's something I know about.
Yeah. And so there's an aspect that there would probably be fewer orcs in the stronghold in game. The fact that we see 4 Ashlander tribes and 4 strongholds is a nice representation amount for absolute character counts. More than that, you start to lose track of which one's which, and fewer than that, you don't get a nice picture. But I think there'd be definitely fewer, more solid and concrete orc strongholds that have a defined family identity, culture, and location, whereas the Ashlander tribes are larger, more spread out, and akin to Israelite or Native American tribes rather than a pioneering homestead.
Yeah, because the Ashlanders, I mean, they're nomads, whereas the Orc strongholds, they don't strike me as nomadic. I mean, they build up their fortifications, their walls, they're those kind of crescent shaped houses, the lodges.
They're very fortified. They just have territory on the edge, and they take as much of it as they can, and there's nowhere for them to move to.
Yeah,
and they get kicked out of it.
I don't know offhand of any records of the strongholds getting sacked. I would assume that absolutely happens. It's just by 4200, Skyrim is kind of chill about it.
True. I just kind of assume it would happen because, I mean, the whole of Orsinium.
Yeah, if they can burn Orsinium, they can burn a stronghold.
Although, it's like,
do we know if Orsinium moved at all in the first 500 times it got burned down, or if it was...
No, it did not.
Okay.
That does seem like a very orcish thing to do. We're just going to build up exactly where you guys burned it down the last time.
Yeah.
And then just 40, 50 or whatever was severe enough that they had to move.
However many times that Orsinium sank into the swamp. Well, yes, that was a Monty Python reference.
Yeah, which is kind of interesting from a cultural standpoint, and it's sort of interesting as well if you look at how Orsinium passed to the Orcs.
Yeah.
As a text, it's the kind of trying to build that heritage almost.
Right.
I know Gortlog certainly was doing that.
Yeah, for sure.
In looking at trying to build that up, and then we get to the situation in the Fourth Era where there's just nothing. It's moved, and we don't really know what's going on. It's got a slightly different name. I can't remember when Orsinium becomes Nova Orsinium or no.
When the Legion moved it.
Yeah. Okay. So yeah, we've got that shift. We've got that shift happening, which gives them even less roots than they had before.
Yeah. And that's the distinction between the nomadic culture of the Ashlanders and the refugee culture of Hrothgar. The nomads and the Ashlanders have a distinct culture, and even though they don't stay in the same site perpetually, they're able to maintain a sense of continuity with their history, whereas Orsinium gets destroyed every century or two, and so they don't have anything there.
Yeah. That's fair enough. Hang on. Yeah. Ferrick's got a question of, well, what would happen if Orsinium wasn't ever under threat or destroyed? There's part of it saying, well, it probably wouldn't be Orsinium.
That was what I was going to say, yeah.
But it's also the idea of, well, there's part of me that's thinking, well, they would go looking for trouble.
I think so too.
Yeah.
Part of orc culture is that they thrive on being oppressed, not feeling oppressed. They don't, there's a big difference. I mean, there's a lot of white people out there who feel oppressed. They're not. So there's like a big, Orsimer in Elder Scrolls, like we discussed previously, it's like it's their lot in life to be, it's their role in the mythic to be crapped out. Yeah. And so the idea of the representation of the Orsimer, in other words, their tower, not being under threat, just wouldn't. It would be a setup. That's what the response by the orcs would be. Is okay. Where are the cameras?
Where's the trick?
What's going on?
Is the cave a trick? Yeah, it always a trick.
Mm-hmm. Exactly. It always a trick.
I can't come up with the exact name I'm looking for at the moment, but I think orc unity can really only be achieved under external pressure. And so they rely on other people to be the enemy, and if they don't have one, they'll do it themselves. And we see that in the way they pick their ruling class. But an interesting narrative shift.
It's a weird kind of nationalism, really.
Yeah.
Us versus them, kind of. Woo.
Right. There's been an interesting narrative shift in Skyrim, as I have not played any of the others. But the way the story sees threats post-Oblivion Crisis is there's less supernatural, regardless of Alduin, whom I still maintain as a sideshow, and more we're moving into actual endgame. If you guys don't like Coda, you should probably sign off this chat now, because that's where I'm pulling this from.
Shouldn't have walked in here in the first place.
Perfect. With the altmer moving into endgame with their goals for destruction of the towers and unwinding of the Orbis, that's a pretty consistent external threat that everyone else on Tamriel, including the orcs, can unite to deal with. So we could be moving into a stage of the story where we see an actual more consistently unified and progressing Orsinium, because they have to if they're going to actually meet this. 5 different fingers can't punch, one fist can, sort of thing.
Yeah.
So with the Thalmor trying to do their thing, everyone else has to stop shitting on the orcs because the Thalmor are a bigger threat. The orcs have to be able to actually experience coming together under non-immediate persecution for the moment and see what they can build up before Coda happens, pretty much. And then I think MK killed them all. I don't remember Coda sufficiently enough for that.
They aren't mentioned, but I would
not
almost
really
think
a big fan of them in the first place.
I think you kind of almost would see a split in orc culture at that point anyway, because there's part of me that particularly seeing how they present the Old Merry Dominions, looking into other cultures in ESO, that I'm not sure whether we can translate it directly to the Third Dominion that we see in Skyrim, but I totally think that they would be stupid not to make some sort of overture to the Orcs and say, "Hey, we like Trinimac as well. Come join us and regain your rightful place as the Shield Thane of Auriel."
Yeah, I think there's definitely a lot of potential for a Quisling story in regards to the cult of Trinimac, going back to Aldmeris and trying to restore that. But
I'm seeing Steve Buscemi with tusks going, "How do you do, fellow orcs?"
Yeah. Well, what have we?
And on that note,
We've literally hit exactly an hour. Did we actually discuss everything we wanted to talk about? Did we do it, Reddit?
I
was thinking about their marriage practices and potentially talking about the split of Trinimac into Stendar, Zenithar, and RK.
You're gonna have to explain
save that for a Trinimac cast.
Okay.
Oh,
yeah,
right.
with Malacath, it's the little bit that squirted out.
Oh.
Quickly, in regards to the marriage practices thing,
Yeah.
the fact that
my
orcs
words
don't have
very
8 tits, and the fact that they have this kind of marriage practice described in Skyrim is incredibly lazy story writing to me, and I don't like that it exists, so I prefer to just ignore both of those.
Orcs have big titties.
I did kind of want the debate of, well, are they mer or are they beast folk? Because that's that
The
and the
Khajiit are mer. The Argonians, I can remember the names. I don't care about the lizards. They're straight up aliens, and so I don't think they count at all. And the mer or man is a state of mind, not a state of body. The Red Guards and the Yokudans are strongly mer aligned, whereas the Dunmer are man-ick, but not. That's more an alliance of convenience and general parallelism rather than actual alliance. And I think the Orcs are men. They're just
Flying over first to think of them as mammoth.
Yeah.
They're mammoth.
Except for Trinimac.
Well, yeah, but it's one of the really nice things I like about the way dualism is represented in TES is it's not perfect. It follows the traditional icon of the yin yang in that the black fang has a white dot and the white fang has a black dot because they cross sides. So there's a tribe of men that hang out with the Aldmer, and there's a tribe of elves that hang out with the Cyrodiils.
Yeah.
And the world wouldn't be balanced if it didn't exist.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I almost wonder with that notion in mind if the Orsimer aren't how the elves kind of see men, like they are the manifestation of that perceptual difference.
Yeah, that's a good point.
Right? Yeah, and so because there's not really a middle ground, they're just kind of in an adjacent sort of area. They're pariahed by both. Men don't like them because they don't look like men.
And their
Elves don't
ears
like
point
them
up.
because, I mean,
Elves don't like them because they do look like men from the old.
almost in a metaphorical kind of sense.
I mean, the Thalmor pride themselves on being pretty. I could see them like you all look the same to me.
Yeah.
Just a thought I had.
Yeah.
That's fair enough. And then there's also the question of if you want to think of them as potentially beast folk, that is that giving Boethia too much credit in the transformation? Do we want to think that the Daedra can't alter the fundamental state of a being? Is that giving them too much control over Nern?
Well, theoretically, Azura altered all the.
That's not true. Khajiit or the Argonians. Beast folk is a racist lie.
Yeah.
Yes. That's pretty much my thought, because if we look at like notes on racial phylogeny or whatever, which talks about no one would ever own up to copulating with an orc.
The leader of the Fight Club in in Oblivion is specifically an instance of this exact case. Nobody wanted to own up to it, but he's a half orc with a human, one parent. I want to say dad. It's really a thing.
His dad was a vampire. That was
That
what
too.
made
That was the twist. Yeah, not that he was
Yeah.
half orc, but the fact that his dad was a vampire. That's the thing that upset him.
Yeah. Like, I absolutely believe that Cyrodiil is chock full of Thomas Jeffersons who have sex with their orcs.
Yeah.
Yeah. No, and that specific example just makes me think Underworld and just yeah.
But there's a lot of Telvanni out there who have kids that are vaguely Khajiit that they don't want to really admit. Like very embarrassed Telvanni out there, just like, oh yeah, sweeps the rugs downstairs. Yeah, we don't talk about him.
That's an Argonian.
No, I
name.
don't think he looks like me at all.
It's got the same widow's peak and everything.
Yeah.
No, it's kind of, oh, you say he has my eyes. No,
Yeah.
anymore, he doesn't.
Oh, we forgot the
does
Telvanni
cliché
system
even
here.
allow
That's
this?
right. This is inconvenient. I'm going to murder it. Yeah.
Yes. Yeah. Anyway.
Well, I think we've covered everything. That's literally 5 minutes over an hour, and I'm just so damn happy about that.
Well, if anyone wants to read all my dumbass fan fiction, it is on my website, and I will plug that in the show notes.
Do plug it. No, plug it right now.
Okay, it's at merlin.net, spelled like my name, /oeuvre, OEUVRE.
Okay.
Okay.
Did
Yeah,
you just have to
and
look that up?
I'll pull all that stuff when I compile the sources for this when
Please
it gets
do.
to YouTube.
Mm-hmm. And the last cast, which was about
Bosmer.
Bosmer, has not been uploaded yet because I'm a fucking idiot. But it will go up after this cast, and then, knowing me, in another 2 weeks, I'll put this cast up. What is next?
What's
Yeah, good
next?
question, Ferric. What? Yeah, I know Neck can upload more win streams. I'm also working on that. What are we doing next?
Well, we've got, if we're talking playable races, we've got either Bretons or Argonians.
Ooh, we keep putting off Argonians because we can't
do
find
keep putting off
an expert.
Argonians.
So please, once again, ladies and gentlemen, if any of you out there know anything about Argonians and have a webcam, call us, dude. Like, seriously.
Well, I'll be honest,
Hey,
they'll-
LV, thanks for your tier 1 sub. 4 months in a row. My God, really? 4 months in a row, and you vote Bretons. Well, we don't have anybody to do Argonians, so you're going to get Bretons.
Yeah, okay.
That's great, but let's pretend that had something to do with you subbing. We'll do Bretons. I'll be nice.
Well, you'll try anyway.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
Let's do Bretons first, then disappointment second. All right. Yeah. All right. I'm actually in the process of reading a lot of articles about Arthurian legend, which Breton lore is chock full of. So might have something interesting to talk about. I'm just saying, don't hold your breath. Anyway.
Okay.
Thanks very much. We'll see you guys in another 2 weeks. Everybody say goodbye.
Bye.
See ya.
Bye.
Thanks for having me on.